honor to invite Yoram Cohen, head of the ISA, and he will be interviewed. Good afternoon, Yoram Cohen. Let's begin with the chaos in the Palestinian front, which is happening every day. It's been going on for years, but obviously, particularly in recent times. Is there a correlation between decisions that the state makes, remarks, and that are said by statespeople and political leaders? Is it just, oil to the flame, or that it's same o, business as usual? There was terrorism now. It doesn't matter what's happening. You know, whatever the meaning, terrorism is here to stay, whatever the government does. I think that the foundation of this situation is almost irrelevant to the current administration. I think is that the Palestinian Authority is weak and collapsing from within. Its security forces are weakening, even to be irrelevant, and the fact that for many years, not months, they don't enter certain fields, areas, like, for example, the refugee camp, created a situation for anarchy. Anarchy means that people have gotten weapons, bought weapons, and now armed militias of 30, 40, 50 men, like in Nablus and Jenin, are functioning like militias independently with no oversight. Now, as long as they're just taking pictures and working in the PA, that's their issue. But now they're attacking, and if we don't stop them in interception, their next places will be Bnei Brak and Elad. And so they have to be intercepted. We have to harm the specific people. We have to do what we can to avoid civilian deaths. And now, in answer to your question, certainly to a certain, in certain respects, if our side, whether the illegal settlers or the state leaders, make mistakes, or God forbid, if Jewish illegal settlers do terrorist attacks by themselves, that is oil to the flame. But I think what happened until recently, including in the last year, without relation to last week, is a result of ongoing weakness of the PA and its inability, despite its promises to address terrorism, to stop terrorism. Let me clarify. You said if our side makes mistakes, okay, have you identified in the last few months or since the establishment of this new government, have you seen things, decisions that were made, statements that were made by the current leadership that have created escalation among the Palestinians? I think that ministers, I don't see any problems in terms of the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense, but I think that certain ministers that make comments in the media before they consider what they're about to say, or they don't understand the implications of what they're about to say, that causes harm, and that harm is hard to quantify, but it certainly doesn't calm things down. It's enough that we are intercepting terrorist attacks, and the IDF is active. That brings about casualties, and the fact that they want to continue to harm us, and more terrorist attacks on our territory. That's bad enough. You don't need to do things on the Israeli side to make things worse. So the Israeli interest is to strengthen the PA or weaken the PA, because there are people, ministers now, that say the PA is an historical mistake and it's time to close it down, shut it down, and take over this land. And we'll take care of security in the Palestinian Authority, not them. Well, first of all, today, not only today, for years now, the IDF has operated, the entire security forces of the State of Israel have functioned within the PA, including A zone, without any restriction. And they intercept terrorist activities as needed, as they arise, of course. On the other hand, on the state level, I think today, from my experience, that the solution, idea, proposal, whatever, of the two-state solution is irrelevant, and in terms of security, I think is a mistake. And so this issue of continuing to stick to the mantra, the two-state solution, that, in my opinion, is a mistake for the next 10 or 20 years. So one state, yeah, one state is better than a binational solution. A binational solution is a demographic mistake, is a demographic catastrophe. So if we don't do two states and we can't, so three states, no. I think that the realistic solution, maybe the other side won't want it, may probably, but as autonomy plus or a state minus, or things that Rabin said weeks before he was assassinated in the Knesset. That's realistic. Now, this can also be promoted. There's something to be done on the state level, things to be done in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economics, but also in terms of security. There are things that can be done. I don't see at the moment the PA being able to give us any assurances or any kind of security capabilities. They can't do it. They don't have it, and maybe they don't want to. So it's impossible to impose upon them our security needs. On the other hand, we shouldn't accelerate their collapse because there is no alternative. But we shouldn't fund them. We shouldn't take care of their hospitals. We pay very high prices, security and civilian and international and otherwise, and we also absorb the impact from the Arab states that we've managed to be able to normalize relations with some of them in the last few years. And I think that this idea is a mistake, a two-state solution, that there's no strategy behind it. You heard the ISA director, and you see the Netanyahu government now, and you say that it's possible to do this proposal of yours, a state minus, you call it. I think that it's realistic, and I think it's also a consensus of a large number of the parts of Israel. If you don't, if you're not, if you don't give in to the left wing, right wing dichotomous paradigm, I think that the majority of the parties, and I said public consensus, but you know what, I shouldn't talk about politics, I would prefer not to, but I think most people in the Knesset would support a state minus model. But at the moment, the state of Israel is in a situation of of the prime minister basically being trapped, a political trap also, exhaustion of parties that understand the situation, each for their own sector, their own group, and those the representatives, their constituents. So I don't think it's realistic at the moment or even right to discuss it. So even if the prime minister wanted to, at the moment he's incapable of discussing it or raising it for discussion because of the reality, because of the composition of this current government. Yes, I think so. I think that what I'm saying is the kind of thing that that we have to address all of the things that are talked about in terms of national security, Iran, Lebanon, Palestinians, and the society in Israel is just as important. This rift, this tear, and where we're being led in recent period is also a question of national security. Our national cohesion has to do with our resilience, and we have a burgeoning rift and more threats from the Palestinian front at the same time. Obviously, these challenges are difficult to face in terms of security internationally on every level. So without the government leading people to cohesion, without that the people who are in the leadership positions knowing how to invest all of their resources to bringing people together, then we'll continue to pay a price. So let's talk about this rift. Let's talk about what's happening in Israeli politics. Maybe a theoretical situation that we are now before an institutional crisis, and the government is making one decision which is totally against the High Court of Justice. Now you were head of you were head of the Shabak, you were head of the ISA. Who should we listen to? The court or the government? People within the security forces of Israel grew up in security. They are oriented to the state. They understand the law. They acknowledge the right of the order of law. They believe in the power of the Advocate General of the State of Israel, and they believe in law and order, even though that they have their superiors, and of course the government are the one that gives them their directives, and the government is the one that funds their activities, and they are subservient to the government. But people in security do not violate the law in any way. They are not allowed to. They follow the law. So they are not allowed to violate the law. They are not allowed to transgress against any law that is defined and established, and maybe it has to be reviewed. Then it's of course brought before the current people, such as the general advocate. But maybe at the end of the day, maybe we won't get to that point. But if God forbid there is a situation, if a minister tells a commander, or the Knesset establishes a law and it's non-constitutional, and we get to a constitutional crisis, we have to listen to the High Court of Justice. It doesn't matter which government is in power. It doesn't matter what topic it is. The separation of powers is built in such a way that something has to define the law, and after it's defined, the court interprets the law and explains it. Obviously, you saw the images from Hawara. I saw it on TV. Yeah. Now, may not everybody remember, you were head of the ISA that went the farthest in the fight against Jewish terrorism, when you allowed for use of force against Jewish violent activists. And we see the activities in Hawara. We see the difficulty of the security forces to deal with Jewish terrorism. There's no arrests being made, or barely any, very few indictments against the Jewish terrorists. Is there any recommendation that you can make to the security forces at the moment? Yes. There's a difference between classic terrorism of a secret group, that whatever, the way that we're used to thinking of terrorism traditionally. Yes, and what's happening? This event is something that I can understand in light of the fact that the murder of the two brothers and the rage and the frustration of the last month, we can see it coming to a boil. What can't be understood is protests are fine. Closing the streets is fine. All of that is legitimate. Organizing, even if it's spontaneously, but if it hurts innocent lives, that's beyond the line. And it's not the people who are not even from Hawara. By the way, they attacked Hawara, but the terrorist didn't even come from Hawara. He came from somewhere else. So it was even a misguided Jewish attack. So when they go to Palestinian homes and burn homes, and it could have ended, by the way, with actual people who did, it could have been even very bad. Now, I don't believe that there's anybody, this is according to what I've heard that somebody is holding hands and collaborating and conspiring with the police in order to stop arrests. I think that the police forces knew that people are going to arrive, probably had an intent to harm, but they didn't understand that it would be so severe. They didn't understand the scope of what was about to occur. So the system in general must address people who are violent and gather evidence. So, and if they don't have the evidence, administrative justice, administrative arrests, yes, bring them to justice. And if you can't do it, and if there's concern of escalating, bringing more violence among the Jews, then you can stop people by administrative arrests. Yes, you can use that. I personally proposed administrative arrests against Jews and got Jews out of their houses and banished them from their homes. And if there was a ticking bomb, there was also investigations against Jewish terrorists, just like there are Arab terrorists. The law is the law is the law. Final question. You talked on Saturday night, there was the right-wing protest, and you vented your frustration that you don't hear from rabbis and the Jewish Zionist leadership. You don't hear their reservations from all of the legal revolutions that this government is trying to enact. Do you understand why the Jewish Zionists refuse to play a part? I can try to understand what they're thinking, and what I believe is that Israeli politics today in the right, what's considered religious Zionists, are basically two key streams. One are religious Zionists in the more classic term, more religious than Zionist, and the other are Haredis, meaning They're other are Likud. They're extreme right wingers, more politically based. The second point that I'd like to make, and that's happening, is that something is unfolding right now that's, I believe, unprecedented. That the leaders in Israel, meaning people at the head of organizations, of public position, um, such as the president of the Supreme Court, the governor of the Bank of Israel, the police commissioner, high positions are now being attacked day and night by politicians, by Knesset members and ministers. And this didn't happen in the past in a way that I would say it's now deliberate, it's systematic, it's aggressive. People are being harmed because their opinions are different from what politically they're expected to have, not professionally, politically. And this makes people terrified and puts them in a corner of not wanting to deal with conflicts, maybe incapable of being in conflict. And I think it certainly impacts people, leaders, public leaders that are now afraid. I'm going back to your initial question, that they're afraid. People in that right wing people that think differently from where the right wing is taking them, but they're afraid to speak. They're afraid of losing the courts in Israel. They're afraid of losing the judicial system. They don't think what's happening is right, but they're afraid and they're not saying anything. And I think in the last few weeks we see more and more people like that who know and are making their voices heard and are voicing their objections. And I think that eventually this will gain momentum until the dam will burst if against those who are leading the reform. Previous ISA director Yoram Cohen, thank you very much. Thank you very much to Ro'i and to Yoram Cohen, certainly for your remarks in light of what's happening outside at this very hour. The security situation oftentimes exceeds the normal bounds, and it goes to Washington and Paris, Berlin, across the seas, even to Abu Dhabi. And about the challenges and opportunities, we'd like to speak about Dor Shalom, head of the State Security Directorate in the Ministry of Defense, and also